Have you ever wondered what the mysterious life of those who kept their word in the feudal court was like? Let us explore the painful and resilient journey of Tam Lin, a eunuch in the Letrung dynasty. Through every step from ink ginger candy to secret tears, the article The Life of a Eunuch, Nameless Memories in the Darkness of the Forbidden Palace will lead you into the splendid but gloomy world of the inner palace, where palace secrets are not just secret edicts or memorials, but also silent desires, beliefs, and human affection. From the first moment she was chosen to join the interior ministry until she became the darkness of the throne, Tam Lin has woven a unique survival story where memories are always intact, even though her identity is severed. Is silence the most powerful weapon? Discover the secret of a eunuch's life, and you will understand that sometimes it is the pain and silent sacrifice that mark a person's true value. Part 1. Moonlight under Yanfu Ferry. Back then, imprinted with time on the dreamy Red River, Yanfu village was immersed in a sea of ripe rice. During the Letrung dynasty, the source of Dongdu culture still flowed through the bamboo fences of the village, through the slanted thatched roofs. Here, Tam Lin was born on a new moonlit night, her skin as white as jade, her lips as pink as lotus petals, making the whole village rumor that she was blessed by heaven. 1. Peaceful and fateful countryside. Every morning, the steady sound of turning ceramic molds echoed from the craftsman's house near the communal house. In the afternoon, the vendor's baskets of fried rice cakes filled with smoke, sweetly inviting. Her father, Mr. Van, bent over to cut grass for hire under the shade of the trellis, his back still curved like bamboo. Her mother, Mrs. Ho, carried raw rice from the distant fields, her head exposed to the sun but her eyes filled with sadness. The family was so poor that they didn't have new clothes for Tet. Yet, because she was fairer than her siblings, Tam Lin became the lucky child in the eyes of strangers. In the village communal house, Mrs. Mai, who used to be a royal guard but has now retired, sat next to a cup of tea, her eyes slightly sad. God-given children must worry about living in luxury. They cannot always drift around on the banks of a pond. The words were as light as a breeze, but to my mother, they were like daggers. The sound of the broom washing rice rustled like pent-up emotions. 2. The underground festival of hair after a market day in the district. My mother agreed to meet Mrs. Mai behind the coffee shop next to the communal house. She held my mother's hand and whispered, "If I take care of it, your children and grandchildren will no longer suffer." A piece of paper, a bag of new rice, and a zinc coin were quietly placed on the mat. My mother could not hold back her tears, but still tried to hold them back, preserving the image of a strong woman. In the middle of the night, my mother took me to the ferry. The moonlight slanted through the leaves, drawing silver streaks on the river surface. The sound of the waves rippled like sad musical notes. The wooden boat slowly left the dock, taking the 3 children into the dim space. I looked back and saw my mother quietly bringing the still hot bantay to my lips. "Eat up, my child. The journey is long and tiring. Mother stays here to listen to Kwanho singing, missing you." 3. Journey to Trongjuan Palace. As dawn broke, the carriage of the Changshan mansion stopped in front of the moss-covered gate. The high wall was a cold color, and the guards stood solemnly on both sides. I was led in through the iron door, where the wind blew. The room was filled with lotus incense. The smell of Chinese medicine mixed with ashes was thick. An old eunuch in gray robes and long beard stepped out, nodded, "Keep it, keep it." Those words echoed in my heart like a strange echo. I didn't know what I had gained, but I understood that from this moment on, my life would no longer be as peaceful as the rippling rice fields. For the first encounter with destiny, the first night, through the brocade wall, she heard the other children's groans. The smell of dried blood wafted in the wind, and the smell of medicinal wine rushed up to her nose. She trembled and held on to the edge of the blanket, imagining the pain as if knives were cutting her flesh. The next morning, the old eunuchs came to check on her, touching her back, touching her forehead, whispering in her ear, "Don't cry, it will all be over soon." I was silent, the feeling of being cut off from myself gradually sinking in. But then, a little eunuch gently slipped a piece of ginger candy into my hand. Sweet, spicy, as the first consolation. 5. Vague fear and desire for freedom. I did not understand what keep meant, but I knew that the path of life had taken a different turn. Looking through the window bars, I saw the leaves of the myrtle swaying, the sunlight gently shining on the cracked brick wall. In that moment, I silently promised myself to live as strongly as the wild grass in the middle of summer and autumn, no matter how harsh the wind blew. The moonlight tilted to the west, as gentle as a lullaby from the past, but also as cold as the incense smoke of the boudoir. I was no longer a country child, nor an official eunuch. I was just a fragile soul, learning to be silent in the midst of power. Part 2. The purification ceremony. The journey through suffering. The lanterns flickered in the quiet room, casting a dark, gloomy smoke. In front of Tam Lin, a simple wooden table held a bowl of medicine as black as ink. The space was so quiet that the ripples of her heart echoed as clearly as the drumbeat. This was the night of the body purification ceremony, the fateful ritual that severed the past, sending her to Trongjuan Fu for the rest of her life. 1. The sound of ink and yeast pain when her name was called. Tam Lin stood still on the cracked tile floor. her skin still smelling of early morning rice, her lips still smelling of yesterday afternoon's rice cakes. Her hands trembled as she held out a small cup containing a thick black medicine, smelling faintly of soapberry and alum. A sad voice whispered, "Take this water, sleep for a while and you won't feel anymore." She closed her eyes, held her breath, and brought the bowl to her lips. The bitter taste rushed straight down her throat, entangled her breath, and flowed into every muscle like a whirlpool. Tam Lin's eyes gradually blurred, the world around her swayed, and before the pain could reach her, she had already slipped into nothingness. 2. Waking up from a dream. When I opened my eyes, the dim light from the oil lamp flickered in the corner of the room. It hurt. The pain lasted as if my skin was being peeled off layer by layer. My hands trembled as I closed the blanket, steadying my breathing. Under my body, the cold void sucked the warmth of my flesh and blood. I didn't cry out in pain. I just felt my heart constricting like a poisonous snake slithering through my veins. A little eunuch gently placed a half-melted ginger candy into her palm. Sweet, yet spicy. She sucked on the candy. The sour taste mixed with the sweet, just like her new life. Both painful and fragile and resilient. 3. The early days. The smell of blood. The smell of medicine and loneliness. 3 mats spread on the cold ground, just enough for 3 destinies to curl up. The wind passed through the small crack in the door, bringing the scent of Chinese medicine, faintly smelling of old blood. Every morning, Tam Lin woke up in a cold sweat. She could not urinate like a normal person. Her limbs were shriveled. Each step was a painful sigh. The sounds on the other side of the wall, moans, sobs, became a haunting soundtrack. During the day, I could only lower my head, trying to suppress the urge to vomit while people cleaned my wounds. At night, I was startled awake by a dream of falling from an areca tree, unable to hold on to the branch, and crashing to the cold ground. 4. First lesson. Breathe like the wind and moon. The old eunuch Qin, his voice hoarse like a dry leaf, put his hand on the boy's shoulder and taught, "My child, do not let your tears be prayed for the enemy. Learn to breathe from your belly, so that each breath is like the wind and moon passing by." I practiced breathing like him, inhaling deeply through my nose, exhaling gently like breathing in incense smoke. Each breath was a moment to awaken my will. When I was in pain, I did not groan, just closed my eyes, feeling the pain drifting slowly through each cell. I learned that silence is the shell that hides the deepest wounds. 5. Recovery phase. From skin to soul, 3 months passed in the days of recovery. My body was thin, my skin wrinkled, my wrists as thin as dry apricot branches, but my spirit gradually became stronger. I learned how to keep my internal organs stable, rubbing wild poison ivy with diluted alcohol every morning to reduce inflammation. At night, I counted the clock strikes, memorized the schedule, to keep my mind from wandering to the past. In the middle of the west corridor, the place for new eunuchs, the fishy smell mixed with the thick smell of camphor. I held my breath as I walked through. Some of my friends shunned me, but I learned to stand up straight, my shoulders and chest full of sand. I was quiet, but my eyes were always watching because memory was the only weapon I carried. 6. A light laugh amidst the storm. Once I fainted in the middle of the kneeling practice yard, and when I woke up I saw another eunuch's worried face, whispering, "You rest, the wound will heal." I smiled faintly, even though my lips were still dry and cracked. That was the first time I realized the nourishment of faith is stronger than any medicine. I learned to swallow the pain, turning it into an inner song, so that I could stand firm against the enemy's axes. 7. Luggage for the future. As the purification ceremony came to an end, Tam Lin did not just lose her past. She received a small pearl from Mr. Qin, which she wore on her chest as a reminder. "Carry it with you to remember that you survived." I wear jade. My heart is warm. A new journey lies ahead. Learning manners, learning how to become a loyal shadow. But deep in my heart, I know I am a small flame, silently burning in the darkness. Part 3. Royal etiquette. From darkness to light. When the physical pain had subsided into thin scars, Tam Lin entered a period of training in court etiquette, a place where only those dumb as stone could reign in the shadow of authority. Zhuan Fu under the Letrung Hung dynasty was majestic and splendid, with brocaded corridors and moss-covered tiled ceilings reflecting the silhouettes of carved lotus flowers. There, every footstep, every ray of sunlight slanting through the curtains could become a trap for the unwary. 1. Walking on gravel. Walking as if not walking, the dim lantern light fell on the wet gravel. Each tiny pebble seemed to groan underfoot. The teacher sternly taught Tam Lin to walk 30 paces on gravel without making a sound. That is the first test of court shadow. Every day, under the dry autumn weather, I would walk on the porch, step by step, back, forward, back, forward. My feet were bleeding, but my lips did not open into a smile. Every time I slipped, I would stop, lower my head, breathe with my belly like a gentle breeze, controlling the pain. At night, I dreamed that I was floating on the windy sea, weightless. Each sound of touching the ground turned into silent music. 2. Pouring tea like lifting the wind. Song of calm. In the classroom, the tea tray was the next object of competition. 3 cups of agar wood were placed on a wooden chair, each thread of clear water trembling like drops of morning dew. The teacher said, "Pouring a cup of water is like lifting a gust of wind, gentle without ripples." Tamlin learned to bend over, slightly lower her head, hold the cup level with her chest, and lightly inhale the scent of lotus tea. Her hands trembled, but her heart was like a peaceful rock. When the water flowed, she adjusted her breathing, stopping the pouring before the last second, her eyes only looking at the center of the cup. The water would not slip out. Night of Three Blades. 3 fateful challenges. Folklore has it that the Night of the Three Blades is a test to determine who can keep their mouth shut enough to enter the inner court. First, pour tea without spilling a drop. Second, walk 30 steps on gravel without making a sound. Third, listen and recognize 3 sounds. The sound of fluttering robes, the sound of bare feet lightly touching the mat, and the whispering of conspiracy behind the curtain. The darkness spread. The candle cast a shimmering shadow on the bottom of the cup. Tamlin stood before 3 judges, 2 old eunuchs and a quiet palace maid. The sound of the late-night wind whistled through the eaves. The bamboo mats swayed. She bowed slightly, picked up the tea tray, poured slowly. Each drop rolled down the edge of the cup. When she stepped onto the gravel, her heart seemed to stop beating. Only the sound of her veins pounding could be heard. When it came to the listening part, she closed her eyes, listened to each breath, and pointed. The sound of the red nose clicking. Chin-faced, an old judge nodded softly, his laughter like a pearl falling to the bottom of the hole. Wooden table and brocade door. Inner court gate. The moment her name was called, Tamlin felt like a leaf floating into a whirlpool. The large brocade door opened, revealing a heavenly candlelight. A blue velvet robe was placed on her shoulders. The dragon-embroidered brocade belt gently curved. The atmosphere in the inner court was splendid yet gloomy, a hint of hidden anxiety. I bowed my head and walked in, my shoulders no longer shaking but straight as copper pillars. But deep in my heart, I was still the one standing behind the curtain, the silent shadow, keeping the secrets of the court. 5. Tears of the wind. Silent feeling. The inner court did not allow crying or idle talk. Every time tea was served to the concubines, she knew their eyes could poison her with just a whisper. When the maids spoke, she could only bow her head, eyes half closed, mouth tightly closed. Her heart pounded, but only she could hear it. No one else could know. The feeling of silence is like the winter wind, cold, without a trace, but seeping through every crack, penetrating the skin. I learned that sometimes silence is an invisible power, making it impossible for the other person to guess the intention. 6. The embroidered handkerchief, the clue of life. Tamlin's first job after becoming a eunuch was to clean the white elephant stables in the backyard. The elephants were tributes from Laos, so majestic that even their excrement became a thing of the past. After finishing her task, she was transferred to the laundry room where the concubines' clothes were kept. A handkerchief embroidered with faded flowers quietly appeared on the sink, a trace of dried blood, a strand of hair on the towel. She bowed her head, learned not to open her mouth, only used her eyes to examine each embroidery thread, analyzing the clues. In this place, the smallest detail could decide fate. Tamlin realized that she was not just a eunuch, she was the eyes, the ears, the darkness monitoring every movement. 7. The last smile of the night, holding on to gold in the void. The inner court scene was a mixture of dream and trap. Once I saw Tanfi silently wiping away tears, placing a jade hairpin on my tea tray. Keep it, like keeping the promise of the deceased. I put the needle in my pocket. My heart stirred. It was not a title, but the painful connection between a severed human life and the power of the dynasty. I began to understand. Silence was not indifference, but listening to the deepest breath of the court. 8. Save a life with a look. Become the darkness in the midst of the ceremonies. Tamlin once saved a new palace maid when she collapsed from illness. She secretly brought camphor balm and told the medical staff that she was allergic to food. She survived, silently smiling at her during tea. I know fame, no profit, just a look. But that look could save a life. I understand that. Even though I am just a small eunuch, I can still become the darkness that protects fragile creatures. 9. Invisible power. Incense and the secret piece of paper. Once she had mastered the ritual, she was sent to the reception room to await orders from the high-ranking concubine. The payment was not gold or silver, but secret pieces of paper, instructions that no one dared to speak aloud. She wrote as fast as the wind, her memory capturing every dot, every faint red mark on the text. The pieces of paper were carried away in silence, but I knew they contained the will of heaven and the destiny of the dynasty. I was the one who kept them, but was not allowed to tell the truth. 10. The road to light. Deep memories. At the end of the competition, when the ritual repeated itself into a familiar rhythm, Tamlin felt like a leaf in an autumn song, gently falling, but still leaving a golden trail on the water. The light from the inner door receded, giving way to the shade of the tree in the middle of the yard. She bowed her head and walked out, her footsteps no longer trembling, but smooth as ripples in the water. Behind the brocade curtain, power awaits. Ahead lies the path of the dumbest stone. Darkness and light blend together, creating a human life that will forever be recorded in silent history. Part 5. Keeping the taste alive. When eating and drinking means life and death. The oil lamplight shone on the lacquered glass tray, reflecting all the flavors of the royal court, the scent of fresh ginger, the taste of precious ginseng, and the lingering scent of the imperial physician's prescription. That was the most noble and dangerous job of eunuch Tamlin, checking and tasting the food before presenting it to the emperor. One small mistake, one remaining poisonous mushroom, could cause her life to be judged as coldly as a fly lost in a bowl of soup. One setting up a strict paradise every morning at the fourth watch. Tamlin appears before the large kitchen like a silent deity. She wears a silk scarf and a blue silk shirt, and holds a small notebook with the seal of eunuch food inspector on it. The main kitchen has already set out a tray with 7 savory dishes, 3 desserts, and 2 types of tea, 7 flavors representing 7 levels of danger. I bent over the kitchen counter, my eyes scanning each dish. Herbal chicken patties, poached eggs and ginseng water, ginseng pigeon soup. My hands brought each small spoonful to my lips, savoring each flavor meticulously, then recording the sensations in my mind like touching a piano key. Every second that passed was a moment of judgment. The strong bitterness, the soft sweetness, the greasy shine or the slight sourness, all were meticulously analyzed. 2. The little fly and the survival index. One stormy night, a tray of ginseng stewed pigeon soup, the emperor's favorite, was brought up. Tamlin unsteadily took a small spoonful, savoring the sweet taste of the ginseng and the soft fat of the pigeon. Half an hour later, everything seemed normal. But at midnight, the palace was in an uproar. The emperor had a severe stomachache. She was summoned to the imperial hospital and locked in a cold stone room with only a single candle. 2 days later, when I was almost in despair, an old judge held a dead fly in front of me. The flies got into the dishes. It was not the kitchen's fault, nor was it you. The king has awakened. You are released. The fly, a tiny creature, became the only witness that saved her life. From then on, Tamlin believed that in the skill of food verification, accuracy is not only a matter of smell and taste, but also luck of fate and keen observation. 3 tips for the perfumer. Not stopping at tasting. Tamlin taught herself countless tips to identify toxins. Observe the color. Bone broth containing metal will turn pale yellow. Old grease left for a long time will create a light black film. Smell the smoke. Even if just 1 bean sprouts, the pungent smell will appear immediately. Listen to the sound. When stirring the soup, the sound of the fat on the surface reflects the quality of the oil. Temperature sense. The warmth of new food can mask low-temperature toxins. I wrote down all those tips in a second notebook, hidden behind the spice cabinet. In the royal world, that piece of paper was more precious than the royal incense. 4. The tragedy of the tongue reaction. Once, Tamlin tasted olive and aloe vera soup, a strange dish only served in the summer. It tasted refreshing but had a slight bitterness. She stopped using her spoon, stopped taking notes, and pretended to drink it all. An hour later, without complications, she nodded to report that it was safe. That night, news came that another eunuch who had tasted this jelly before her had suffered a seizure. She kept quiet, silently thanking her survival instinct for telling her at the right time. 5. Responsibility and loneliness. Food inspection is not a job for the faint-hearted. Every time I lifted the spoon, there was no joy in my heart, only moments of extreme tension. In the cold stone room after the fly incident, I thought, if I die, who will remember this memory? But when I stood back in the kitchen, holding the spoon, I knew I owed the people of the La dynasty. I owed the emperor peace. I practiced patience by meditating on my breathing before each tray. Inhale, count to 3, exhale, count to 5. This self-imposed discipline helps me stay calm and not let fear overwhelm my senses. 6. From kitchen to bedroom. Full of faith over the years, his reputation spread far and wide. The eunuch named Lean had never caused any trouble and sometimes survived the bloodiest meal. The emperor began to ask about his taste. This soup, do you think we need to add a little lemongrass or less licorice powder? I bowed my head and replied, a sprig of lemongrass will sweeten the taste, Your Majesty. The emperor nodded calmly. For the first time, I was not simply a taster, but a culinary consultant. That trust gave me the feeling that I was alive for a reason greater than myself. 7. Silent victory. It is not recorded in history books, but Tamlin knows. Every day she can still stand in front of the food tray. Every time she can survive after an accident is a silent victory. Some people take military achievements, some take glory, but I take every peaceful breath of the emperor. I remember the note that said, on the night of January 14th, allergic to millet, must wash 5 times. That note saved a little prince when a millet feast was prepared for the 5th prince. I know the credit is not mine, but it is forever engraved in my mind. 8. Taste of life. The job of food testing taught me one thing. Taste is not just about food, but also about life and death, trust and responsibility. I recorded each new taste in my heart, as if wanting to preserve the warmth of the human world in the harsh royal palace. I named my second notebook, The Taste of Life and Death. In it, all the tips and taste diary entries are woven into a long poem of destiny. 9. The mysterious relationship between eunuch and king. As the emperor began to ask for my opinion, the relationship between the two people gradually became closer. I was not allowed to speak, only bowed, but my eyes understood. He trusted my sense of smell and gave me a small part of his power. I felt that I was no longer a shadow, but the most accurate scent keeper of the court. 10. Moving forward amidst danger now. Every meal is still a gamble of survival. Even though she was lucky thanks to the fly, she doesn't dare to rely on luck forever. Tamlin continues to sharpen her senses, update her notes, and train her mind. Because she understands only one thing. While eating is life and death, living is savoring each moment with the utmost care. And when the last candle went out, I closed the book, The Taste of Life and Death. Placing my hand on my chest, my heart was beating not out of fear, but out of responsibility to keep His Majesty's meals from ever being contaminated with poison. I walked back to the small room, covered with moss, ready for a new day of food testing. The next day of my silent but intense life. Part 6, The Passcode, and the Unsaved Memory. Night fell. The Shangshu Yuan Palace was immersed in a drifting cloud of incense smoke. Tamlin, now not only a eunuch copying letters, but also a silent wall. The person directly receiving and processing secret edicts was immersed in the deep night under the flickering candlelight. Those secret edicts, hastily written with special ink, faded in just 3 hours, leaving no trace. And her mission was to read, memorize, and then burn. 1. The Forbidden Letter Door. Locked day and night when the Shangshu Academy closed its doors. It was so dark that the sound of footsteps echoed like thunder. An old eunuch, the custodian of secret documents, opened the wooden safe and took out a set of secret edicts sealed with vermilion. He handed it to me. You will develop your mind into a living archive. Read, memorize, burn. I closed my eyes, breathed in through my belly, and then opened each page. The first line, order 100,000 border troops to move to the northwest. I remained silent, using the remember to forget technique. Read forward, read backward. Imagine the fire melting each word. 2. Haunted by flying ink. When memory is an infinite warehouse, the ink is a type of ink that only appears clearly in the first few minutes. When it dries, the letters fade into a shadow. All I have left is my memories. My mind is divided into a command room, a secret edict room, a troop dispatch room. Each room is like a small house, without doors, immersed in darkness. I fill it in one by one. Troop numbers, military provisions, secret troop dispatch orders. When the ink runs out, I close the page, solemn. I am not allowed to rewrite, not allowed to speak again. Every night I repeat the cycle, read, memorize, forget the words, burn the notebook. 3. Night rain. Leaked memories. One night, heavy rain poured down. The glass of the window was rattling. I was reading the secret edict about the march schedule, quietly making a plan in my head. Depart on the night of the 15th. Arrive at Sunnam Station on the 3rd of next month. Suddenly, the back door opened slightly, a stack of wet, smudged papers. The old secretarial supervisor frowned. This paper has fallen into someone's hands, a sign of a leak. I quietly retreated, feeling the cold spread. The country, the soldiers' provisions, and the lives of people all depended on me. Every drop of rain could seep through the paper, leaking secrets. I silently promised, this memory must be more intact than a stone wall. For the value of a memory, tomorrow, the troops will move. The day after tomorrow, the secret edict will be announced. But I, the invisible remembrance, understand the value of each word. When history books later record the large-scale Battle of Sun Nam, just one sentence in the secret edict the night before had decided the direction of the battle. I cannot share, cannot say, but in my heart I know it is my own memory that has contributed invisibly. 5. Insomnia. When memories flood back, taking in too much honey was just a burden. I couldn't sleep. My heart was pounding and my back was drenched in cold sweat. I lay awake in the middle of the night, opened my eyes, and imagined hundreds of secret edicts spinning in my head. Once I dreamed that I was standing in the middle of the great hall, before the empty throne, and heard a faint whisper, "Who decides human life?" I woke up crying silently. My memory became invisible shackles. The more I held onto it, the more I was besieged. 6. Inner fire technique to stay calm. I came up with the technique of igniting the inner fire, imagining a blue fire burning in my chest, burning each character after it had been stored in the chamber. When my memory was full, I would set fire to it in my imagination, keeping my mind clear. Every night, I thanked the old secretarial supervisor for teaching me. Memory is a weapon, but it can also kill the one who carries it. 7. The mysterious relationship between writing and forgetting. Over time, I realized that I was not only writing for the court, but also forgetting for myself. Every memory was forced out of reach, like a bird with its wings cut off, but it circled in my mind. I became a wall of concealment, everywhere, but unable to take refuge. 8. Invisible punishment in the palace. There were people who were tortured to death for revealing secret edicts. I once heard the story of an old eunuch whose head was locked in a secret vault just because he said the word shy. His bones were hastily buried behind a screen. I lowered my head and whispered weakly, silence is not just a choice, it is a way of life. 9. The magical light of the night. One last night, when the door of the upper library opened, I stepped out into the middle of the brick courtyard. The yellow light mixed with smoke. I felt the cold wind. I bent down, took a deep breath, then turned back to look at the empty bookshelf. Every page had been burned, leaving only ashes. But those ashes were proof of a living memory, which could not be erased. 10. The end. The silent secret keeper on the mossy wall of the small room. She hung the word remember in thin Chinese characters. She no longer struggled to keep each line of secret instructions, but in her heart she always kept an invisible map. She understood. The life of a eunuch was a series of memories that could not be saved, and her responsibility was to let the ink fly away, but not let the memories disappear. That night, when the first moonlight of the month shone through the window, she smiled. I am shadow, wordless but cannot be erased. And Tam Lin, a eunuch of the later La dynasty, continued the endless cycle, reading, memorizing, forgetting, burning, until the court no longer needed a memory keeper. On a misty night, when the Trongzhuan palace was quiet under the silver moonlight, Tam Lin walked lightly through the corridor along the mossy walls. There were no other footsteps, only the soft sound of the silk dress sliding across the tiles. Her heart was heavy with the image of a person she could not name. That girl, her eyes as deep as the crescent moon, had once sat by the water jar, tears streaming down her cheeks as she shared an unfulfilled dream. She remembered her round eyes, the corners of her eyes wet, softly asking, "Do you know how to love?" And her heart, forever silent, asked itself, "Will I ever have the courage to answer?" In the corner of the backyard, the sycamore trees swayed gently, the wind whistled like a whisper. Tam Lin remembered the night lamb gave her a small letter, only 2 sentences long. "If you leave, please take my name from your dreams with you." The paper was faded, the edges were slightly frayed, but its meaning was still fresh on her lips. Lamb, the person she had led her to kneel step by step, the person she had shared the spicy ginger candy with after the shock, had disappeared forever from the list. When she sat next to him under the porch, only hearing his heart pounding but unable to speak, she felt her heart both awakened and suffocated at the same time. People say eunuchs have no feelings, but Tam Lin knows clearly emotions do not disappear, but only quietly hide themselves among the strict palace rules. One night she saw the lipstick mark on the edge of Tanfi's teacup, thinking she saw a drop of red blood containing so much desire. She held the cup slowly as if holding a secret, and in that moment she felt jealousy, envy, and immeasurable longing. In her heart drenched in night dew, Tam Lin silently thought, if there was a day of sadness when she raised a cup of lotus seed tea for Tanfi, then there was also a time when she secretly gave an embroidered handkerchief to a palace maid who had fallen out of favor. That was not a favor, but a sigh of sympathy. When the girl was beaten for daring to take the handkerchief he kept everywhere, she secretly left her some antidote, hiding it for her peace. In her eyes there were tears of gratitude, and she realized, love does not need a name, it is just a silent action. Every time the piece of paper in my shirt pocket was added with that line, I wondered, does love only exist in a place of separation? When Tam Lin knelt on the brick floor, her eyes turned toward the skylight. She heard the distant echoes of her hometown, missed the scent of rice paper, missed the murmuring water of the Red River. She realized that nostalgia was also a form of love, reaching toward the source that could never return. One day while I was arranging the tea tray, Tan Fei glanced at me through the large curtain and asked softly, "Have you ever dreamed of being in love?" His voice was like a gentle breeze, but in my heart there was a wave of surprise. I lowered my head and replied silently, "Yes, I dreamed." And Tan Fei just smiled, as if he had seen a wordless mystery. I didn't know if it was comfort or a challenge, but my heart beat strangely, as if it was the first time it had ever been moved. As time passed, each palace maid and eunuch I met carried a story and a desire. I silently recorded in my mind the shy smile when someone complimented me on an embroidery, the trembling hands when handing me a handkerchief, the whisper calling her name as she stepped out of the sick room. All of it became a map of emotions that I could not draw on paper, only engraved in my heart. The day I was ordered to be transferred to the mausoleum town, a quiet place in the middle of the pine forest with cold wind blowing through the cracks of the door, I wondered, would anyone still carry my name in their dreams? When I touched the cold stone pedestal, wiping a few drops of incense on the statue of Quan Am, I whispered softly, "Please understand our nameless loneliness." And in the old wooden box I placed a small brief piece of paper, "Lamb, the person who loved without permission." No one read it, but in that moment, I was freed from the shackles of silence. In the last nights, when the first moonlight of the month quietly shone through the window, Tam Lin suddenly laughed softly, then gently stroked the jade piece that Mr. Qin gave her. She suddenly understood. Feelings do not need a title, they just need to be kept in the soul. Whether it is love, affection, or sympathy, all exist silently like the wind through the leaves. And that is what keeps her human, not just an errant boy in the royal power. She walked in the shade of the mausoleum, her shoulders straight, her eyes still deep blue. In the rustling pine forest, she whispered to the trees, Our love, though nameless, will always be the guiding light. And when the wind swept away the echoes of the past, Tam Lin knew that no matter how many ties life had cut, that small soul would still live silently, still love silently, without anyone calling its name. In the early autumn winds, when the pine leaves outside the mausoleum tilted and fell, Tam Lin had crossed the threshold of old age. Her hair was still neatly tied up, and she wore soot once a month, but her legs were no longer as strong as before. Every time she knelt for a long time, her knees ached like a wound that had not been cared for too long. Her eyes, once sharp during the nights of guarding the secret edict, were now tired from the tiny letters of the memorial. But deep down, she felt more clearly than ever that old age was not the end, but the moment when memories and the present intersected. One morning, Tam Lin received an order to move to the mausoleum, a place reserved for longtime eunuchs who were innocent and free from competition. People called it rest, but she understood that it was truly the last stage of her life of service. The small room next to the mausoleum of a benevolent but short-lived former emperor became her new home. The cold stone walls were damp. The corner of the porch was covered with moss. The space seemed to bury old memories. The first day of clearing the fallen leaves, I bent over, sweeping each yellow leaf. The morning dew lingered on my blue silk shirt, but I no longer trembled. Each falling leaf was a memory gently released, letting the ashes float in the air. In the afternoon, I changed the water in the incense burner, wiped the stone pedestal, and adjusted the faded patterns. My hands were slow and meticulous, like a whisper to the deceased. I am still here, still keeping the earnest wishes of kings and lords. At night, under the silvery moonlight, my ears still heard the rustling of pine trees like the whispers of souls. One night, a group of porters brought the stone stele to place in front of the mausoleum. I silently watched them pray and place white chrysanthemums. I did not participate, just stood behind the reeds, my eyes fixed on wondering how many people understood my silent presence. The shadows of black Aodai passed by the palace gate, not ghosts nor completely living people, as if reminding me that I myself was also at that fragile boundary. One day, on the full moon night of the 7th lunar month, when the incense and the crowd had dissipated, I sat at the foot of the shrine, wiping the moss off the stone slab. Suddenly, I discovered a statue of Guanyan that was crooked. My heart was moved. I removed the moss, and behind the pedestal was a dark wooden box locked with rusty copper wire. With trembling hands, I brought it back to my room, sat by the candlelight, hesitated for a long time, then opened it. Inside there was no gold or silver, just a thin, discolored stack of paper with crooked handwriting and no name. Each page was an unfinished story. The silent cry of a palace maid, the tears of a young eunuch, the prayers of an unnamed concubine. I put the box back. My heart choked with emotion as I realized that the most precious thing was not the gold or silver, but the buried pages of memories. The full moon shimmered like sketches of wet eyes. She smiled bitterly. Living to the last day, she could no longer hold power, no longer copy the memorial, no longer taste the soup, but she was still the lyrical person of the harem. She had seen the scene of palace maids hugging their pillows and crying until their eyes were tired, had heard the groans of those whose confiscations had been confiscated, had felt the spiciness lingering on the corner of the teacup. All had condensed into a silent epic running throughout her life. When I sat down to flip through the grey cloth diary, the first one recorded stories about the harem, the second one recorded stories about food and drink. I had nowhere to hide it now. I flipped through each page, the oil lamplight dancing on the words, creating a halo of light. The first line read, "The eunuch who had been on duty at Namjiao at night, holding a memorial, hiding the incense." The next line said, "He released the pearl Mr. Qin gave him into the wind, smiling as lightly as the wind at the end of spring." I smiled softly as if I was talking to the past. On the last day before leaving the small room, I placed the notebook under the statue of Quan Em, clasped my hands and silently prayed, "Please protect these wordless memories, so that even if I leave, someone will still hear this story." I locked the wall, used a broken brick to block the door, and hid the memories in the moss. The next morning, people found her room empty, with only the wooden box and the faint ink stain remaining. No one asked, no one knew. They just thought she had retired in the sense of retirement. But Tam Lin understood this was the real place of eternal rest, where moss and darkness kept nameless things. When his legs could no longer kneel, I followed the wind and the leaves, walking out of the mausoleum gate. The pale dawn light on the road leading back to the capital, I heard the lively sounds of the world. Children laughing on the ferry, the smell of rice paper in the afternoon mixed with smoke, and the echoes of Quan Ho folk songs at the village temple. I smiled softly, walking slowly. In my heart, the memory of a life as a eunuch without power still silently lit a flame of hope. One day, my quiet voice will touch someone's heart, so that the story will not be lost in nothingness. And when the pine forest outside the mausoleum echoed with the sound of wine whistles, I turned back to look one last time. Tam Lin, who had experienced so much suffering, so many ups and downs, felt no regrets. Because in the season of the last leaves, I realized it was the memories and nameless feelings that kept me forever a human being. whether in the dark or in the light. On an early winter afternoon, when the sun was casting a slanting golden light on the moss-tiled roof, Tam Lin received orders to return to the capital to attend the Namjiao ceremony, the last time in her life. The eunuchs led the way through the ruined city gate, red dust swirling in the wind. Throughout her life she had participated in the Namjiao ceremony many times, but that day her heart was strangely moved because she understood that this was not only a journey of service but also the last chance for her to face her buried past. When the procession advanced to the altar, the sky was cold and dry. The sound of bells and drums blended with the vast spirit of heaven and earth. Tam Lin stood at the front with 11 other eunuchs, each wearing a golden plaque embroidered with a moving dragon. She tightly held the piece of paper she had copied dozens of times in her mind. Each dot, each stroke of ink seemed to be engraved on her heart. Feeling the heaven and earth tilting, her conscience also surged in the opposite direction. A small person, but carrying the vow of the entire court to offer to heaven and earth. As the emperor slowly raised his hand to take the teacup, I bowed my head and placed the tray on the altar. The sound of the wind blowing through the flag echoed like the whispers of the ancient people. I suddenly remembered the first moment I stood before Namjiao, still an orphan, my eyes bewildered as I held the pearl king gave me. Now, I was no longer that child, but the one silently keeping the king's vow. When reading the petition, her voice was soft and long like the deep breath of the universe. I respectfully thanked heaven for blessing the country with peace and prosperity. Each sentence and each word was like a pearl falling in the quiet space. She pursed her lips as she prayed, but did not dare let a tear roll down her cheek because tears could make people misunderstand her as weakness, and weakness was a sin in the Forbidden Palace. After the ceremony, when the scent of incense had faded, I quietly entered the side study, where the pieces of paper were folded and hidden in wooden boxes. I sat by the doorframe, my trembling hand touching the surface of the boxes. Each box was an invisible axe, waiting to strike down the disloyal. I was silent, but inside, I felt strangely free. Free because I knew I had completed the final mission of my eunuch life. On the evening of her return to Chengchun Palace, she received news from the scribe that the grey cloth diary had been miraculously found in the mausoleum archives. She held her breath as she read the last lines of the diary. The most truthful things are not recorded in history books, but only exist in the hearts of those who dare to remember. It was a whisper from the past, like the whispers of hundreds of eunuchs who lived and died in silence. In the middle of the night, I stepped out into the hallway, where a small window opened onto the lotus garden. Moonlight filtered through the leaves, shining on the water around the old bronze drum. I placed my hands on the edge of the pedestal, inhaling the faint scent of magnolia, then looked up at the vast sky. In that endless moment, I felt all my memories, from the sweet and spicy ginger candy on my first night in the palace, to the taste of the ginseng pigeon stewed in the life and death soup, all gathered into a shimmering mass of light. 60 years of her youth she had devoted, but in her heart, there were no regrets. Tam Lin pursed her lips and whispered, "I lived not only for orders, but for memories. I kept them as treasures, so that one day when someone came looking for them, they would understand that behind the brutal power there were still hearts that knew how to love, care for, and cherish people." As the night wind blew through the brocade curtains, she turned and walked into the small room where the wooden box and diary waited. She gently placed the pearl Kin gave her on the first page, then closed the last page, without anyone touching it. She believed that tomorrow morning the ashes and faded paper would dissolve into space, transmitting the song of the unknown. She quietly closed her eyes softly, singing a lullaby in the song language of her childhood, letting the life of a nameless eunuch gradually fall into eternal sleep amidst the vast pages of history that could not bear to be forgotten. When spring began to blossom and the apricot blossoms outside the city began to bloom, Tam Lin decided to take a walk along the old road leading to Yanfu village. Under the pale morning sunlight, she saw the old ferry dock still the same, with waves gently lapping against the wooden dock. The familiar scenery seemed to invite memories to flood back, the first gusts of wind of the season blowing on the thatched roof, the restless sound of the rice mill, and the smell of fried rice crackers wafting through the small alleys. I stopped by the old Bodhi tree, where my brother and I used to collect dry leaves to feed the cows. Now the branches and leaves are greener, but I realized time has left its mark on my face. My eyes are no longer as bright as before, but deep in them, gratitude still shines, gratitude for those who have given me life, allowed me to keep my memories, and allowed me to love in my own way. There was an old woman sitting on the side of the road selling bante, the sound of her footsteps haunting. She looked at me, smiled slightly, eunuch returning to his hometown, who would recognize him. I bowed, my eyes filled with doubt. In my pocket was a hot bante. She had personally fed it to me. It was the first bante I had eaten since leaving Yanfu. I put it in my mouth, the sweetness spreading, the spiciness at the corner of my lips like a piece of my first memory just touching again. Before leaving the ferry, I quietly lit an incense stick in front of the statue of Quan Am at the village communal house. The incense smoke mixed with the wind, taking me back to the past. The first time my mother gave me the bante, tears rolled down but silently. I bowed my head, Silently praying, I pray that the souls of the deceased palace maids, eunuchs, and nameless concubines may all find peace. I hope that our memories, though severed, will remain intact in someone's heart. The sun gradually rose. I walked through the communal house yard, where I used to study Chinese characters and recite Quan Ho songs. The sound of the tin tao lute and the soft, melodious voice seemed to lull someone's soul. Now, I am no longer a naive child, but I can still hear that melody, the melody of freedom, of the past wrapped in the lyrics. On the way back to the capital, each stroke of the wheel seemed to leave an imprint on the memory trail. I thought about the spicy ginger candies, the small pearl that Mr. Qin gave me, and the secret edict that burned silently in the night. All of them had woven together my life a series of challenges, suffering, and proud beliefs. When night fell, I arrived in front of the Interior Ministry, the place where I first stepped through the brocade door. Now, only wooden pillars and moss-covered walls remained. I touched the crack in the stone threshold and breathed softly. In this life, despite being alone, we can still do something great, keeping memories, spreading love, and marking nameless breaths. Returning to her small room in the capital, Tamlin opened the drawer and took out the gray cloth notebook. She wrote a few last lines, her handwriting shaky but filled with conviction. I am nameless but never silent. I have lived and loved nameless, wordless forever in the memory of mankind. Closing the page, I placed it on the small altar by the window. The flickering candlelight cast a shadow on the brick wall. Under the lingering smoke of incense, I gently closed my eyes, sending my final greeting. Carry this story with the wind, so that anyone who has been forgotten can be remembered. In my heart, the story does not end here, but has only just begun, beginning in the souls of those who dare to remember, dare to love, and dare to tell. And then, when the last candles were extinguished, leaving only the lingering ashes in the quiet space, Tamlin, the anonymous person in the Forbidden Palace, huddled by the window watching the dawn break. The morning sun shone through the bamboo blinds, painting a warm yellow light on the wall, as if affirming a wordless truth. Even if one's identity is severed, one's memories remain intact in the breath of time. My life, from the first rice cake to the fly that saved my life, from the secret edicts that flew by to the gray diary pages, has woven a colorful tapestry of survival and emotion. In the cruel palace, I dared to preserve human love, a nameless, homeless feeling, but warm as a burning fire. Let these pages become incense burning in the hearts of readers. A reminder that memories are never meaningless, and that empathy, no matter how small, can still touch the soul. Even though Tamlin has left the throne, her story will forever exist in the breath of the wind and the sound of falling leaves outside Yanfu Ferry, and in the deep beats of many hearts that dare to love, dare to remember, and dare to cherish. And if one day in the middle of a bustling city or a quiet riverside you come across the silhouette of a silent traveler, don't run away. Give them a smile, because they might be the ones carrying a story in their hearts that they want to tell.